Okay, let me see if I can give you a few helpful hints for working your way through the impacts lab. So for this lab, you'll need two KMZ files. You'll need both the world impact structures and the moon craters. When you open up the moon craters, or if it opens up in Google Earth, it'll ask you if you want to go to the moon. So you'll want to say no, because the initial lab questions are going to be based on this first KMZ file, and then we can switch to some views of the moon later on in the lab. So download those, open those. They should look something like this, where you'll see, come back here, sorry. You will see something like, where are we? Right here. World impact structures and the moon. We can uncheck the moon because we're not looking at the moon, and sometimes extra data trying to be imported into Google Earth slows it down a little bit. So you're going to see all these places where either there's some confirmed impact craters, some probable, some suspected, and some rejected. Just a little note about this legend here. The colors can be a little confusing because a lot of them have reds and different colors that don't seem to stand out. These colors refer to the words or the names of the locations. So you can see this blue here is suspected. Okay, if it's red, the words are red, it's rejected. And then let's see what else we have. Confirmed are the kind of purplish ones here. Suspected, there's a few that are white that are probable. Right, so the circles all are red, and everyone sometimes thinks they're all rejected, though the red is referring to whether it's unexposed or exposed. And the color of the words is actually telling you if it's confirmed, probable, suspected, or rejected. So keep that in mind when you're working through the lab. So it's just going to ask a couple questions, some general stuff about where we find craters, about certain places and how many craters are there. There's a little tip here which I'll just walk you through, but on some of the impacts, when you click them, because they're unexposed, they're going to have some feature to just show you where it is, like a circle, but sometimes that circle is covering some of the information we need to look at in the topography or the terrain. And so you'll see this extra check mark. So the name of this impact crater is in Texas, and it also has this additional feature associated with it. If we check or uncheck this, it'll take away this feature so that we can see the terrain, and I'll try to demonstrate that in the lab. So what we're going to do for most of the lab is try to identify the different types of impacts that we see. And so these are kind of the four. We're going to lump these two together. So these smaller craters are from smaller impacts. They're pretty basic. And so in some of the web pages you visited about craters and crater morphology, there's a variety of different types. They usually do either simple or complex. We're going to add a few more to the complex range and kind of separate some of those out. And those are these last three that you see here. So the simple crater is just what it sounds like. It's smaller. So look, sometimes it's hard to see some of these extra features in the more complex craters. Like a central peak crater just has a kind of an upwelling here in the middle from where the land surface actually rebounded up. And so there's a little peak in the middle, but it's just one, it's fairly small. As the impacts get more devastating and the objects that strike the earth get larger, we get these ring of uplifted area. And so of course we have this peak ring. And then when they get really enormous, we get these multiple rings that kind of move out from the center. But another way, if you're having a hard time identifying these, is how big they are. So you can see that the complex or the simple crater is pretty small. They're in the 1 to 2 kilometer diameter size. Right, once we get to central peak, we're in the 30s. So something that's in 10 to 50, maybe even up to 100 might fall in here. Once we get into the 200s, 300s, we're talking that probably is forming something like this. And when they get extremely large, we get kind of features like this. So if you're having a hard time seeing these features, use the ruler tool and measure them, and that also can help you kind of determine which impact crater type that you have. Okay, so the other thing is, of course, we're going to ask you to go to a couple locations. How do you do that? Remember, it's the search bar, but it's not the one up here. It's the search bar down here, which mine is tiny because I squished the Google Earth so it would fit. But if you type in meteor crater here, you can see that it starts to highlight the information in the, if I type it right, meteor space crater, it highlights the correct one. So here the blue is highlighted. And of course, if you double click, remember, it'll fly you to that location. And so then you can kind of take a look at some of the features there. You can measure it to determine its diameter, and then that can help you figure out which one you have. So go to Meteor Crater and do things like that. You're going to go to this crater in South Africa, and you're going to measure it, and then you're going to try to figure out what that is. And you're going to keep jumping around to these different places, okay? So you can type in these names in that search bar. It'll take you there, and then you can figure that out. This Sierra Madre one, this is the one where it has an overlay to help you identify the edges of the crater because it's been pretty worn away that you'll have to turn off. Let me see, Sierra Madera. Let me see if I can do that for you. So Sierra Madera is this one, which I spelled it wrong maybe. Of course I did. Too many R's. So Sierra Madera. I can't spell today. Let's try. So it's highlighting this one. We double click it, and what you're going to see here is this is the crater. So it's telling you the size or showing you the size so you can measure it. But if you're trying to identify what type based on some features, it's really hard to do, of course, because there's this white thing in the way. So if you come down here and toggle it off, you can kind of get a view and toggle it back on for size. So that's what that's referring to when you go look at that crater. Then it's going to ask you to go back to Meteor Crater, but in this case we can just use this map. Because a lot of times we do elevations. How high the rim is some indication that it's a crater and not a volcanic depression or some other feature like that. And so we want to get depth of the crater itself, how high the rim is above the surrounding landscape. So when it's referring to elevations, we want to use benchmarks as much as we can. So it's referring to a benchmark here. Of course, the X also marks a spot where someone's actually measured the exact location, which is also what benchmarks do. So the bottom of the crater, and then you're looking at another benchmark. Remember, it's got the little BM next to it, so you know which one it is. So do some calculations, and then bam, we're going to jump to the moon and do basically what we did on the surface of the Earth, was determine what type of crater it is. We're going to do that once again, looking for the features. If it's complex, we can also use size to help us. So how do we get to the moon? Okay, well, we're going to go back to our little KMZ files way up here. Oh my goodness. I know it's there somewhere. Holy cow, there's a lot of craters. So we can close that out, because we've searched for these, so they've expanded. And so we don't need these anymore. We can turn those off. We can then go to the moon. So up here, you'll see there's this little planet icon. We click it, and it'll allow us to go to the moon. And so it'll take a minute to load all the information. And then, of course, we can come down here to our KMZ files, and we'll turn on the moon data. And if we expand this one, we've tried to actually just highlight the ones we're asking you about. So you don't have to search these. There's only a handful here. We double click, it flies you to them, and then you just answer the question. So fly to each one, try to determine what type of feature you have, answer the questions there. And the final thing we're going to do is just have you play around with this little program that was developed by Purdue. And so you can click here to go to that program. Now, it's using Adobe Flash, and so I'm using Google Chrome. A lot of times it blocks Flash, a Flash player, and so if you go to the settings in your Google Chrome, I don't know if it'll cover all this, but If you go to privacy and security under site settings, you'll see as you scroll down there's a flash option, and usually it's set to this, which is it blocks it, but you can have it ask first before it runs anything. So if you make that adjustment and then you go back to the site that we just went to, when you click it, there's a pop-up here that says you can allow it to run. And so what this does is it allows you to input some information about the object that might strike the Earth. And so a diameter, a density, an angle, an impact velocity, and then where it's hitting, right? Is it hitting the water, or it's hitting rock? And then here is how far away you are from the impact. This is what this is giving you. And then you can hit calculate impact, and it'll give you information about what might have occurred there. It'll talk about the wind velocity, how much heat was produced, size of the crater. So what I want you to do, just to get a feel for how object size and impact velocity and things like that, is once you get that up and running, these are the parameters you'll put in that program, and then it'll bring up that secondary window that tells you some properties of that impact of this object size and what it did to the Earth and some of the other features. So when you plug these in, you'll see that new window, and then it'll give you some examples of what might have occurred, and we're asking you to look at those and figure out what the answers for these would be. So you're going to do that just a couple times. So for that one impact where it's got these parameters, you're going to have a couple pieces of information. Then you're going to change the parameters and a couple more pieces of information. And finally, you'll have a third example where you'll have different parameters and information that occurred there. Okay, so not too complicated, not a lot of math or any kind of equations here. Just having you look at some objects and making some determination, mostly about craters, and then of course getting to play around with that program a little bit. So hopefully that won't be too difficult this week. But as always, any questions or comments, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll try to clear those up for you. All right.